The room was sealed before sunrise. According to internal church correspondence dated October 1908, a directive was circulated quietly among several dioceses in Europe. It did not come with ceremony. No bells rang. No announcement was made to the public. The document was brief, formal, and unusually direct. It warned clergy against performing a specific ritual without special authorization. The warning referenced a text first compiled in the year 1614, a manual that had guided generations of priests through one of the most feared confrontations known to the Church. Witnesses who later spoke about the directive said the tone was not theological. It was cautious, almost defensive. The ritual it addressed was not new. It had been used for centuries. But something about the way it had been practiced and what had begun happening during its use forced the Church to restrict it. Some priests obeyed immediately. Others did not. Church archives refer to it only by its formal name, Rituale Romanum, 1614 edition. Among exorcists, it became known simply as the Old Rite. What follows is reconstructed from archived letters, sworn testimonies, and a private journal written by a parish priest who was present during one of the final unauthorized uses of that ritual before enforcement became strict. His name was recorded but later redacted in official copies. In surviving references, he is identified only as Father A. He did not believe in possession when this began. He believed in illness, trauma, and the human mind under strain. He believed most reported cases were misunderstandings wrapped in fear. He agreed to observe the case only to prevent what he called religious harm to a vulnerable patient. His journal begins with a sentence written in hurried ink. I expected hysteria. I did not expect the voice. The case was brought to the parish in late winter. The subject was a woman of 23 years, identified in documents as Elena M. She had no known history of psychiatric confinement, no criminal record, and no recorded neurological disorder. Her family described the onset as gradual, then sudden, then unbearable. According to witness statements, the first signs were behavioral shifts. Silence replacing conversation. Sleep replaced by long periods of motionless wakefulness. She stopped responding when spoken to, but turned her head toward empty corners of rooms as if listening. Her brother testified that she once said, very calmly, "He stands where the light ends." A physician examined her and diagnosed acute dissociation with stress response. Sedatives were prescribed. They had no visible effect. Within 2 weeks, her speech changed. She began answering questions before they were fully asked. Not guessing, answering precisely. When corrected, she became irritated and said, "You think in straight lines." He does not. The family priest was called after an incident at night. At approximately 2:10 a.m., according to the mother's sworn statement, Elena sat upright in bed and began reciting a prayer in Latin. The family was not educated in Latin. She had never studied it. The prayer was not common liturgy. It was a funerary petition rarely spoken outside monastic orders. When asked later how she learned it, she reportedly answered, "It was already here."
She pointed to her chest.
The parish priest visited twice. He documented agitation, resistance to sacred objects, and sudden changes in vocal tone. He requested medical reevaluation. A second physician suggested catatonic features with religious fixation. Stronger medication was attempted. There was no improvement. 3 weeks after onset, the case was escalated to diocesan review. This is where Father A enters the record. He was assigned not as lead priest, but as observer, present to ensure that no extreme measures were taken without justification. His journal suggests he agreed reluctantly. He wrote that exorcism, in his words, often amplifies belief until belief becomes symptom. He expected theater. Instead, he recorded procedure. The first meeting took place in a modest rectory chamber cleared of furniture except for a chair and table. Elena was brought in by family members. She walked normally. She did not struggle. She did not look at anyone. She sat when told. Father A wrote that her eyes did not wander. They fixed on a blank section of wall and stayed there. The attending priest began with standard preliminary prayers. Not the forbidden rite, not yet, only approved minor formulas for spiritual disturbance. He spoke gently in the vernacular language. No reaction. Holy water was placed on the table. No reaction. A crucifix was set down beside it. No reaction. Then the priest shifted to Latin. The first line had barely left his mouth when Elena inhaled sharply and smiled, not broadly, not dramatically, but with what Father A described as recognition. She turned her head toward him for the first time and said, in a different voice pattern, "That is not the one you practiced." The priest stopped reading. He had practiced a different opening line privately before entering the room. No one had heard him rehearse it. The session ended early. Notes were taken. The family was instructed to continue medical supervision. No declaration of possession was made. But something changed in Father A's writing after that meeting. His sentences shortened. His handwriting pressed harder into the paper. 2 days later, a second session was scheduled. This time, authorization was granted to test a segment of the 1614 Roman ritual, a structured interrogation prayer historically used to identify oppressive entities. By that year, many dioceses had already discouraged its use except by specialists. But permission was granted in this case under supervision. Father A recorded the preparation in detail.
Doors closed.
Windows latched. No observers except 3 clergy and 1 physician. A notary was present to record spoken exchanges verbatim. This was standard practice in disputed cases. Elena entered quietly again. But this time she looked at each person in the room, one by one, as if counting. When she reached Father A, she tilted her head and said softly, "You brought doubt with you." He did not answer. The ritual began with invocations, slow, measured, formal. The language was Older Latin, structured, and repetitive. Its rhythm was deliberate. The purpose was not performance but pressure, theological, psychological, spiritual. For the first 10 minutes, there was no change. At minute 11, the physician noted a sudden drop in her pulse, not elevated, not stressed, lowered beyond resting rate. He checked twice, believing he misread. At minute 13, Elena spoke over the priest in a whisper that did not match her breathing pattern. "You skipped the salt." The priest had, in fact, omitted a traditional blessed salt preparation step due to time constraints. He continued. At minute 16, the temperature of the room was recorded as having dropped several degrees. The fireplace was active. No drafts were detected. This note appears in both the physician's and notary's records independently. At minute 19, the responses began. The ritual text includes formal questions, not conversational, but declarative challenges. The priest spoke one such line, a demand for identification under authority. Elena laughed. Not loudly.
Not wildly.
Briefly. Like someone hearing a child misuse a word. Then she answered, not with a name, but with a statement. At minute 23, her posture changed. She did not convulse. She did not thrash. Instead, she straightened with unnatural rigidity, shoulders back, chin level, eyes unfocused. Her voice, when it came again, carried a resonance that the notary later described as layered. "Stop using the old keys." The priest did not stop. The ritual continued for another 7 minutes before authorization was withdrawn by the supervising cleric. The reaction profile did not match expected psychological patterns. The physician recommended suspension pending further review. The session ended. But what happened after the session is what altered the course of the case and contributed to the later restrictions placed on that ritual text. Because according to 3 separate testimonies, the responses did not stop when the ritual stopped. They followed Father A home. His journal entry that night contains only 6 words written across the center of the page. "It knows my hesitation." The next page is filled edge to edge. No margins. No corrections. He wrote that he began hearing the Latin phrases from the ritual repeated incorrectly, subtly rearranged, while alone. Not spoken aloud, but forming in his thoughts with unfamiliar emphasis. He stated clearly that he recognized the structure, but not the sequence. He tried to pray and found himself substituting words unintentionally. He wrote, The text feels like it is being answered somewhere I cannot see. 3 days later, against recommendation, the supervising priest approved a full performance of the 1614 Roman ritual protocol. It would be the last time Father A would agree to observe. The chamber was moved to a different location, a monastery sublevel room with stone walls and a single reinforced door. Only essential personnel were admitted. Written clearance was required. Before the rite began, Elena looked at the ritual book in the priest's hands and said quietly, "That version is not safe when spoken correctly." No one recorded breathing for several seconds after she said it. The priest opened the book anyway. The priest opened the book anyway. The binding cracked slightly at the spine, a sound small enough that it should have been ignored. Yet everyone in the chamber turned toward it. Later, Father A would write that the noise seemed to arrive a fraction of a second before it was made, as if anticipation itself had produced an echo. The room had been prepared according to older directives, not modern guidelines. Candles placed at 4 points. A relic sealed in glass positioned on the table. A crucifix mounted higher than eye level. The subject seated, not restrained, but watched closely by 2 attendants standing within arm's reach. Elena did not resist the preparations. She watched them with steady curiosity, like a person observing craftsmen assemble a machine whose purpose she already understood. The notary confirmed the time. The physician checked her pulse again and frowned. He rotated his wristwatch toward the supervising cleric without speaking. The pulse was low, slower than sleep. The first invocation began. Unlike the preliminary prayers used days earlier, the 1614 text did not ease into address. Its language was juridical, structured like a legal summons rather than a comfort. It did not request. It commanded under authority invoked through hierarchy. The cadence filled the stone chamber and did not disperse. Father A noted that the acoustics behaved strangely. Words seemed to remain suspended rather than fading. He wrote that pauses felt crowded. At the 3rd section, Elena closed her eyes and began moving her lips silently in precise synchronization with the Latin, half a beat ahead. The priest altered pace deliberately, attempting to break rhythm. Her lips adjusted instantly. He skipped a line. She spoke it aloud. Her pronunciation was exact. The supervising cleric signaled to continue. At the 7th command formula, a direct prohibition line, Elena's breathing stopped completely for 12 seconds. The physician stepped forward, hand hovering near her throat, but before he could make contact, she inhaled sharply and smiled without opening her eyes. "Better," she said. "That line fits." No one had spoken to her. The priest continued reading, but witnesses later reported that his voice had changed. Not in tone, in distance. It sounded farther away, though he had not moved. The temperature drop recorded in the earlier session repeated, but more severe. Condensation appeared faintly on the metal base of the candle's stands. One attendant later testified that he could see his breath. At minute 14, the ritual reached the interrogation segment, the most disputed portion of the 1614 protocol. It required direct address and identity demand phrased in absolute theological authority. Before the priest could finish the sentence, Elena answered. "Not with a name." "With permission," she said. The priest continued over her. "With permission," she repeated louder. "It only answers because you permit the question to be a bridge." The supervising cleric instructed the priest not to engage with unscripted responses. The next command line was spoken, a dismissal formula used to force withdrawal. Elena's head turned sharply toward Father A, though he had not spoken, and stood behind the others. "You are the open one," she told him. He wrote later that the statement produced a physical sensation, not fear, but exposure, as if something had correctly identified a structural weakness he had not known was visible. The priest raised the crucifix and spoke the adjuration again. Elena's chair shifted backward across the stone floor, not violently, not thrown, but with steady pressure, sliding several inches without her feet pushing. Both attendants grabbed the chair and held it in place. She did not struggle. Her hands remained folded loosely in her lap. Her voice changed again, not deeper, not louder, but multiplied. The notary described it as two tones speaking through the same mouth, slightly misaligned. "This book was locked for a reason," the voice said. The supervising cleric ordered continuation. The ritual text progressed into a longer denunciation passage, a section many modern exorcists had already stopped using even before official restriction. Its sentences were complex, invoking layered condemnations and hierarchical chains of command. Halfway through the passage, the candles at the far end of the room extinguished simultaneously. No draft. No smoke trail. Simply dark. The attendants relit them with shaking hands. Elena laughed softly, almost sympathetically. "You keep using the long form," she said. "It gives more surface." The priest's hand trembled for the first time. Drops of wax fell onto the page. He did not wipe them away. Minute 22. The physician attempted to take Elena's pulse again and recoiled. He later stated under oath that her skin felt cold in layers, warm at the surface, cold beneath, like touching water over ice. The interrogation demand was repeated: name, rank, duration, claim. Elena opened her eyes. Witnesses agree on this detail with unusual consistency. Her gaze did not search faces. It fixed on the ritual text itself. "You are pronouncing it correctly now," she said. "That is dangerous." The supervising cleric asked the priest to proceed faster.
He did.
The pacing changed. The Latin tightened. The commands came closer together, leaving less silence between them. At minute 22, the physician attempted to take Elena's pulse again and recoiled. He later stated under oath that her skin felt cold in layers, warm at the surface, cold beneath, like touching water over ice. The interrogation demand was repeated: name, rank, duration, claim. Elena opened her eyes. Witnesses agree on this detail with unusual consistency. Her gaze did not search faces. It fixed on the ritual text itself. "You are pronouncing it correctly now," she said. "That is dangerous." The supervising cleric asked the priest to proceed faster.
He did.
The pacing changed. The Latin tightened. The commands came closer together, leaving less silence between them. Elena's posture straightened further, beyond natural spinal extension. Not forced. Effortless. Her shoulders aligned with the chair back without contact. Then she spoke in clear, fluent Latin, not repeating the text, answering it. The notary's transcript shows overlapping speech for nearly 30 seconds. Priest and subject speaking structured theological phrases simultaneously, grammatically responsive to each other, as if in debate. The priest stopped reading. She did not. She continued for 3 more sentences, then finished with a phrase not found in the ritual. Father later translated it privately as, "Authority misused becomes invitation." The supervising cleric ordered holy water applied. When it touched her forehead, she flinched, but not in pain. In irritation. "That is not the problem," she said. "The words are the problem." The ritual book fell closed. Not dropped, closed. As if pressed shut by a firm hand, though both of the priest's hands were visible holding the crucifix. No one spoke for several seconds. Then Elena looked directly at the supervising cleric and asked calmly, in her normal voice, "Do you know why it was shortened later?" No one answered. Because no one present knew that it had been, or would be. The session was suspended. The official record marks the reason as environmental instability and procedural risk. But Father A's journal describes the mood differently. He wrote that the room felt answered. Not attacked. Not threatened. Answered. He could not explain the distinction, but he underlined the word twice. After the chamber was cleared, the ritual book was wrapped in cloth and sealed in a cabinet normally used for relic storage. Access required 2 keys. Both were logged. That night, Father A did not return to his residence. He stayed in a guest cell at the monastery at the supervising cleric's request. He agreed, though he wrote that he did not believe physical proximity mattered. Sleep did not come. He described hearing structured language internally again, not random phrases, but grammatically correct Latin arguments forming and dissolving before he could fully remember them. Each carried the same emotional tone. Correction. Near dawn, he rose and went to the chapel to pray silently. He did not open a book. He did not speak aloud. He knelt and focused on familiar lines memorized since childhood. Halfway through the prayer, he realized the wording had shifted. The structure was intact. The meaning was not that he stopped immediately. He later wrote, "It is not trying to speak through mouths. It is trying to speak through forms." The next morning, before any further ritual was approved, a message arrived from the diocesan office. It referenced earlier correspondence, concerns raised in other regions, and advised suspension of the full 1614 protocol pending review. The supervising cleric read the letter twice. He ordered all further sessions to use only revised, simplified formulas. When Elena was informed there would be no more readings from the old text, she showed her first visible sign of distress. Not rage. Disappointment. "That was the only one that opens fully," she said. The physician asked what she meant. She turned to him with genuine surprise. "You felt it," she replied. "You just don't have a word for it." That afternoon, without the old rite, her symptoms changed pattern. The anticipatory answer stopped. The Latin stopped. But something else began, something that none of the earlier reports had mentioned, and which would later appear in 3 separate restricted case files tied to the same ritual tradition. She began describing things that had not happened yet inside the building. And that evening the first of them did. The first incident occurred just after evening bells. There was no ritual in progress. No prayers being spoken over her. The revised protocol had reduced direct confrontation to brief, structured blessings followed by observation. Elena had been moved to a monitored guest chamber in the monastery infirmary wing. One attendant remained outside the door at all times. A second rotated every hour. At 6:42 p.m., she looked up from the untouched meal tray and said quietly to the attendant seated across the room, "The glass will break before you stand." He assumed she meant the water glass on the table. He reached for it reflexively. She shook her head once. "Not that one." He later testified that her tone carried no threat, only certainty. At 6:44 p.m., a framed protective panel mounted high beside the door, thick, old glass covering a printed blessing, cracked from corner to corner with a sharp report and collapsed outward into the corridor. The attendant had not yet risen from his chair. There was no impact mark, no temperature shock. The corridor window was closed. The supervising cleric ordered all predictive statements logged from that point forward. Over the next 12 hours, she made 7 more. A candle in the lower chapel would not stay lit. It did not. A storage cabinet latch would fail. It did. Metal fatigue at the hinge. A visiting priest would misquote a line he had spoken daily for 20 years. He did mid-prayer and stopped in visible confusion. Individually, each event had an explanation. Collectively, they changed the tone of the inquiry. Father A wrote that coincidence lost its comfort when it began arriving on schedule. Without the old rite being read, her demeanor grew calmer, but the calm felt occupied. She slept with eyes partially open. When spoken to unexpectedly, she answered with relevance before the question formed fully, but no longer in Latin, now in precise, clinical language. "You think removal is the same as closure," she told the supervising cleric during a morning check. "It is not. You stopped turning the key. The door is still shaped." He asked her what door she meant. "The one made of command," she replied. Medical review was requested again. A senior neurologist traveled from the city. He conducted extended examination over 2 days, reflexes, pupil response, auditory triggers, memory recall. His written report survives in partial copy. It concludes with a line underlined twice. No pathology sufficient to explain anticipatory cognition or responsive multilingual production under stress. He recommended transfer to a medical facility. The church declined. On the 3rd night after the old ritual was halted, Father A experienced what he first described as a dream, then crossed out the word and replaced it with episode. He woke seated upright in the guest cell chair, though he remembered lying down. The candle on the desk had burned out. The room was dark but not fully. The corridor light beneath the door outlined the floor. He heard Latin being spoken at conversational volume. Not from outside. From the desk. He stood and opened the door immediately. The corridor was empty. The sound stopped. He wrote the experience down at once, noting his own skepticism in the margin 3 separate times, as if arguing with the ink. The next supervised prayer session with Elena used only modern, shortened formulas, declarative but simple. No layered condemnations. No extended identity demands. She tolerated them with visible boredom. Halfway through, she spoke in her normal voice. "He is not here for those." The priest asked who she meant. "The one you were reading to," she said. "He attends structure, not comfort." The supervising cleric ended the session. Internal correspondence increased in urgency. Copies of earlier European advisories about the 1614 text were requested. Several mentioned similar patterns, not possession intensifying, but interaction deepening when the full formal structure was spoken correctly. One restricted letter summarized it with unusual bluntness. The longer juridical forms appear to establish dialogic conditions rather than expulsion conditions. Father A underlined that sentence repeatedly when he copied it into his journal. Dialogic conditions. Not removal. Conversation. On the 6th day, authorization was granted for one final controlled reading from the old text, not a full rite but a contained segment, to test whether the predictive phenomena correlated directly with the language structure. Father A objected in writing. He was overruled. The chamber was changed again, this time to a smaller archive room with lower ceilings and fewer reflective surfaces. Only 2 clergy, the physician, the notary, and Father A were present. No attendants. No observers behind glass. Elena entered and stopped at the threshold. Her expression changed for the first time into something unmistakable. Relief. "You kept one page," she said. No book was visible yet. The priest removed a single marked folio from a sealed envelope, a photocopied leaf of the 1614 interrogation command, approved for limited test use, so the original volume would not be handled again. He did not sit. He read standing. The first line produced immediate reaction, not physical, spatial. Father A struggled to describe it. He wrote that the room's silence changed density, like air before a storm, though no weather was present. Elena closed her eyes and exhaled slowly. "Yes," she whispered. "That shape." The priest continued. Only 3 sentences authorized. At the second sentence, the physician's recording watch, a mechanical device, stopped. Later inspection found no fault. It restarted when wound. At the third sentence, Elena spoke over him in layered voice again, but this time quietly, almost kindly. "You see now." The priest lowered the page. The supervising cleric, present only for this test, asked, "See what?" Elena opened her eyes and looked directly at him. "That authority can be used as a ladder," she said. "Not only a wall." No one spoke. The page was returned to the envelope. The test ended. That night, a final directive arrived. Higher authority, unmistakable seal. It prohibited unsanctioned use of extended juridical exorcism formulas derived from the 1614 structure, except by specifically trained and licensed exorcists under updated guidelines. It did not use the word banned, but every priest present understood the effect. The old rite was closed to them. When Elena was told there would be no further readings, none at all, she grew very quiet.
Not disappointed this time.
Attentive. "You closed it correctly," she said. "That matters." The supervising cleric asked what would have happened otherwise. She answered without hesitation. "It would have learned your voices." Her condition shifted rapidly after that day. The anticipatory statements stopped entirely. Sleep returned, deep and unbroken. Latin comprehension vanished. When tested, she could not translate even the simplest phrases she had previously spoken fluently. Within 2 weeks, she was discharged to family care with periodic pastoral visits. No further manifestations were recorded in official follow-up. The case file was sealed with restricted access notation. Father A requested transfer out of investigative duty. It was granted. His final journal entry regarding the matter was written months later, in steadier handwriting. "I no longer believe the danger was the presence. I believe the danger was the format." We assumed command language only closes. Under certain conditions, it also connects. He added one final line beneath it. The ritual was not removed because it failed. It was removed because it answered.